Okay, so today we're going to talk about hate speech, and we're going to do this from the perspective of the health approach, but rather than me giving any sort of a lecture about what is the health approach, which that's lengthy, I'm going to kind of like give a quick overview, and then we're going to hand it over to one of our cooperation circles, Emina Frijlak from Bosnia and Herzegovina. She's going to walk us through the meat of the presentation, and co-facilitate with me, but then we have another guest who I'll introduce in a minute. So before we get into the next slide, I just want to say a health approach. What is a health approach? So health approach is thinking about violence as a behavior. So it's a behavior which can be prevented and which spreads in a contagious manner. So it has the same characteristics as a contagious disease, and therefore the same tools and approaches that can be used to interrupt and stop the spread of contagious diseases can be adapted and applied to violence. And today we're going to look at together how this can also be applied when you're thinking about interrupting and stopping the spread of hate speech, right? So the three components of a health approach are to detect and interrupt. So be proactive, look for where it might happen, and try to prevent it from happening in the first place, right? Secondly, change the behavior of the highest risk. So we don't need to have programs that focus on everyone. We need to have programs that reach the people who are most likely to be engaging in that behavior, in this case, hate speech, right? So be very targeted in your approach. And a lot of times what I've found over the years is that even programs that say that they're working with the high risk tend to work with like the top maybe 90% of people who are at risk, and of those, maybe only 3% are really at the highest risk. Or sometimes we miss them all together because we're just kind of looking at the wrong group of people. So be very diligent in your analysis of who do we need to reach, whether it's for preventing violence or preventing hate speech, and then make a program that focuses on interrupting and stopping that behavior in that specific cohort of people. And the reason this is important is that if they're the ones who are doing it, that's why we need to reach them. We don't need to convince people that aren't doing violence or aren't engaging in hate speech not to do hate speech. Now, we do need to encourage and inspire people who can reach those people to use their influence to try to interrupt and stop that behavior in that specific group, right? So it's a little bit of reaching both, but being very specific about how we do that and really do the analysis before you do it, right? Now with hate speech, because it's an online behavior, where it's more difficult, you can't like work in a specific neighborhood, right? So we have to think differently about how we're going to organize this and what is the way for doing that. And hopefully we'll have some good conversations around that today, like how do we adapt this and apply it in the context of hate speech. So detect and interrupt, change the behavior of the highest risk, and then change the norms that support that behavior. So in places where you have very high levels of violence, or where you have maybe let's say like a particular chat room that has a lot of hate speech, there's a certain acceptance of it for whatever reason, right? So how do we push back against that norm? And how do we change that norm that's supporting that behavior? Now, of course, there's a relationship between the behavior creating that norm, right? And the norm supporting that behavior. And so we have to look at how do we do that. So that's a health approach in a nutshell. We're going to come back to this toward the end, and after we've heard the examples that we've heard and looked at the tools that have been shared, and talk about which of these are actually interrupting and stopping the spread, or which ones might be changing the norms, etc. So with that in mind, we will look at some of our great cooperation circles are already doing amazing work related to hate speech. So whether it's looking at Building Blocks for Peace Foundation in Africa, or Youth for Peace CC in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or the Youth Cafe, or the Bay Area Interfaith Council, which has some great new videos that they've just released like in the last month and a half, I think, or 2 months. That is a campaign against hate. All of these are like really good examples of work that our cooperation circles have done related to hate speech. And so I'm excited to share with you that 3 of these are from Youth for Peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I have invited the program officer, as you know, Emina Frijlak, who's the program coordinator for Youth for Peace, to co-facilitate and share from this knowledge. She's got a breadth of knowledge personally and from her work with Youth for Peace. So she's going to really be carrying the meat of the program today and has a lot of great ideas on how to make this interactive. I want to also introduce, I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Larissa Abaunza, who is my colleague in the working on partnership and violence prevention at URI. And then we have a co-presenter, a presenter, but co-presenter, whatever, Zahed Amanullah, who's with a senior fellow with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, who's also going to share a tool that he was involved in creating that our cooperation circles, all of you around the world, could possibly use in combating hate speech. So with that, Emina, I'm going to turn it over to you. But do you want me to play this video first?
Yeah, yes, please. Let's have a video and then let's dive into the discussions.
All right, and Emina, we haven't discussed this, but I know it's like, do you want to watch the whole video? And that gives more people time to join if we do. Do you want to do that?
Just
okay.
Yeah, you can just play the video. Wait.
All right. Wait. Can you hear it?
So do images. They can change lives for better or worse. But some people use messages that violate other people's rights to dignity, equality, and safety. So when does free speech become criminal hate speech? And how do we best respond to it? There's no agreed definition of hate speech. That's why in some cases, those with privilege try and discredit critics by opportunistically accusing them of hate speech. Usually, hate speech is classified as derogatory or discriminatory language towards an individual or group based on their religious beliefs, ethnicity, race, or nationality. The UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech includes sex and gender. International law dictates that some of this speech should be protected. In other words, some can be criminalized, only when it is linked to incitement to violence, hostility, or discrimination, and to racism. Two helpful guidelines here are the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, and the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD. Additionally, the United Nations Rabat Plan of Action on the Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred advises us at which point specific speech crosses the line into causing violence, hostility, or discrimination. These three instruments have helped lawmakers define and courts to assess whether speech qualifies as hate speech and what to do about it. And especially what to do when hateful expression is not directly linked to hate crimes involving incitement and/or racism. While internet companies today have to obey laws prohibiting hate speech, there is a question of how they interpret and implement these laws in practice. There is also a question of how they treat hateful content that appears to be within the law, like whether they tolerate, delete, or downgrade it. Tech companies are working to address these problems, especially after advertiser boycotts and accusations that profits are generated by allowing hate to proliferate online, while not spending serious money to combat it. But the way they treat hateful content remains vague and hidden from independent research and public scrutiny. It's unclear when or why algorithms automatically recommend, downgrade, or remove hateful content or groups. And although they use artificial intelligence to manage the issue, this doesn't sufficiently cater for the context of words and images. The risk is that news reports on hate speech are caught in the net, while coded words and images for hate are not recognized. Another problem is inaction by the companies, even though with their data they can see when hateful content begins to scale to incitement and organizing of attacks. Key strategies to address this problem? First, promoting internet transparency is key if companies are to fall in line and deliver full respect for human rights, maintaining people's dignity and safety, while legitimate expression is allowed and indeed promoted. Second, ensuring that journalists are free to report and expose hate speech, working without fear when they call out leaders and their followers who whip up anger through insulting stereotypes and memes. Third, supporting citizens through building their media and information literacy so they can recognise and respond to hate speech through critical thinking and human rights awareness. Navigating the fine line between free speech and hate speech isn't easy, but in the interests of protecting human rights for all, we can and must work together more intensively to address the problem, without silencing free expression and the benefits it has for democracy, development, and human rights.
All right, thank you for watching that.
Yeah,
So
wonderful.
now let me know, I'm handing over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen, and thanks for letting us watch this video. It's quite informative, but it's also very, I would say, a good starting point. And as Larissa already sent in the chat box, there is a link for something called Padlet. And now I will ask Karen just to stop sharing your screen. I'm going to share my screen with the Padlet. So for us to understand a little bit better what is hate speech, I don't want to give you like one definition and tell you this is hate speech because, as you also could hear, there is no universal definition, unfortunately. That's what even makes this problem even more complicated because it's hard to define it. Because different countries, different governments, different platforms, different academia is defining it a bit differently. So there are a lot of attempts to define it from academia, from legal points of view, from social media point of view, etc. But in the Padlet, I actually picked 3 different definitions that I would like you to read, and then you can put a like to the definition that you like the most, or you can even comment on this definition and tell like, okay, I agree to this part or don't to this part. But you can go to Padlet. I will share the screen and I will give you some 5 minutes to go through these definitions, and then we can discuss a little bit about it. What does it mean, certain things inside certain definitions? So I'm just going to start also sharing, and then, but you can already go to Padlet and then you can already start reading it. So you have some 5 minutes to go through it and think of it, and I'm gonna just leave you now in silence a bit for you to focus. Please imagine this as a wall on social media where you can read certain comments, and then you can just, involve yourself into conversation if you want. You can either like or you can comment on this if you want, or if you want even to give your own definition here, write it down and say this is hate speech for me. This is sort of just a conversation between us, and let's imagine it as sort of a social media platform where we exchange as well. Okay, do you need more time, or you had enough time to read the definitions? Okay, I can see that most of you are quite ready. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, because I want us to be able to, see each other when we are talking about it. So you could see 3 different definitions, and I could see that the one from the UN, from the United Nations Plan of Action Against Hate Speech, got like the most likes, but it doesn't mean like is the best one, because that's also recently I attended a discussion with Alice Nederitu, who is representing the UN Office for Prevention of Genocide, and she said this is also just a draft definition. It's not a legally binding definition, so it's very important that we understand none of what you just read there. It's like a legally binding definition. It's a explanation or attempt to explain what hate speech is, because every country in the world has its own legislation when it comes to hate speech. So also social media in certain countries is much more restricted than in some countries because of these I would say it's hate speech legislation or hate speech legal legal definition that exists in certain countries. For example, in Germany, Germany has a really strong law on internet and also on hate speech. So some things cannot be seen on social media in Germany, but you could easily see them in Bosnia and Herzegovina because our legislation is like really loose. So is there something in these definitions that you saw that like that stayed with you, that you would say, okay, this is something I definitely think is hate speech, or this is something that I could relate to and say, yes, I would define hate speech this way? Or is there something unclear there that you think should be cleared much more in order to help us to understand hate speech better? So I'm opening the floor to you. I can see that probably Karen, you said that the lack of clear definition of hate speech contributes to the confusion about what can and should be done about it. That's I would agree with that. I would agree with that because it's hard to define it, and I would recommend to any one of you, if you would like to understand hate speech better, there is a very good article which is somehow comparing all different definitions and all different approaches. It's like 33 pages long, but it's worth reading, where you can see like the complexity of this phenomenon and why it is so hard sometimes to take any kind of action because people don't agree what hate speech is. And in certain parts, some people are even defending that hate speech is free speech. So you're allowed to say whatever you want because you are free to speak. So there are a lot of proponents of this as well, unfortunately, but it's up to us to do as much as we can. And I'm sure that Zahid will present this tremendous toolkit that you could use for at least doing one part of it, and that's campaigning, which is one part of countering, not countering, I would say addressing hate speech. But is there anything that you would like to say about its definitions, or something that stays with you that you would like to share, or if not, we can continue.
Can I jump in with something just from our perspective of my focus is on violence prevention. And so I really am looking at this from the perspective of, is this potentially inciting some violence somewhere? I think hate speech itself is violence against people. There's that old expression, that, calling names is actually hurtful to people, right? We don't want to hurt people. But in terms of physical violence, if there's something that's inciting physical violence, or even if it doesn't seem to be inciting it, but then you notice a link, maybe Zahid, you can talk about this, between what's being said online and what's happening offline. How is it manifesting itself? We need to pay attention to this, and we really need to aggressively try to get ahead of anything that's resulting in or leading to physical violence offline. I think personally that we should also be trying to push back against all forms of hate speech, even if it's not leading to violence offline and physical violence, right? It's all bad, and we should not be accepting it. As a community that is trying to create cultures of peace, justice, and healing, I think it's important for us to really think about what we're doing and how we're doing it. Now, it's not necessarily us, but we can facilitate other people. We can encourage other people. We have an amazing network at URI of between 1,100 and 1,200 cooperation circles who all have influence in their communities, right? So what I'm hoping that we'll get out of this conversation today is an excitement almost about our potential as a network to begin to push back against what's become very prevalent, at least in the United States, but I think internationally, which is hate speech, right? It's not okay, and it can't become the norm. It can't be the norm, right? So how do we use and empower our network to really be the change that we want to see in the world, right? So I'm hoping that people get really excited about this and learn from this conversation from people who've been doing this and who can tell you how to use the tools and show you how to use the tools that are out there, and to give examples of what's worked and what hasn't worked, right? So that's my hope for today, and thank you for letting me intervene, Emina. Back over to
Please,
you.
can you just keep sharing the presentation so we go back there and we just go through some slides very quickly, and then we go to these actionable points, as you said, like what we have been doing and what we think could be done.
Okay. I think I need to get back to the slide deck here. All right. And sorry. So we just did this slide.
Mhm.
I'll go to the next.
We can skip the connection of violence and hate speech. We can go, yeah. Yeah, there. Wonderful.
I don't want to present. I don't know.
Okay, so just from the beginning and then just very quickly you go through it. It's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we already mentioned this, but I don't want to, make you scary and say like every hate speech is going to become hate crime. It's not gonna, and thank God it's not becoming, because there is a bunch of hate speech there, and just very tiny part of hate speech becomes hate crimes. But it's very important to understand that all hate crime instances involved hate speech before. This is how it works. So in the worst scenarios, if we have like hate speech unchecked, we can have like really large scale atrocities and crimes, as we could see in the Nazi Germany. We could see it in the Holocaust. We could see it in my own place, Bosnia Herzegovina, during the war in Yugoslavia. We could see it in Rwanda, and also we could see it in the case of Myanmar, in the Rohingya population. When it was happening, there was clear connection between hateful messages on Facebook and real life violence. And also the same was for the 2019 attack against Muslims in the Christchurch. It's New Zealand, because that guy, I don't want to name him because I don't want to give him the space. He literally wrote a huge hateful manifesto before he did what he did. The same was the attack against the Jews in the Pittsburgh in the United States in 2018. All of that preceded with certain manifestos, certain hateful behavior, certain amount of hate speech that we were not we, but people were not paying the attention so much. And this was somehow, showing that something will happen. So it's very important, as Karen said, that we address as much as possible hate speech instances as we can, because we cannot risk if something will develop into something or it will not. Of course, there are certain, I would say, indicators that you can see if some hate speech is going to lead to certain violence, but also don't think only on the violence on the physical scale. Don't think only if something physically will happen to people. Think also the psychological consequences that hate speech can have on those who are targeted. Very often when we talk about hate speech, we talk too much about the legal perspective. So, legally we can punish this, we cannot punish that, etc., etc. But we don't speak about hate speech so much from the perspective of those who are suffering, from the perspectives of those who are targeted. So that's why it's very important that we understand that any kind of instance of hate speech we should be addressing. Of course, we cannot address everything. The world is huge, especially social media, but it's important to spread the awareness among the people to understand what hate speech, what the words that can do to other people. So we can go on, Karen, please. So I'm giving you very shortly 8 criteria of hate speech, but this is something I'm not advising you to have as a list when you see something, because this was compiled by these author sellers, and I told you about his paper of 33 pages on defining hate speech. And he literally compiled this from different hate speech definitions. So it's very important that if we want to understand hate speech, that we understand it targets a group or individual as a member of the group. We need to have in mind that most of the definitions have this. The messages is expressing hatred, you know, you have to ask yourself, like, is there a purpose for this message except the hatred that is expressing? Then the speech causes harm, but don't think of the harm, as I told you, only physically. Think also the psychological harm that hate speech can have, and also on the harm that can on the whole community, not just on the specific target, on the specific group of people. Also think, is it public or directed at a member of the group? Most of the hate speech definitions and most of the people who are actually academically or legally dealing with hate speech, they really require that the hate speech is public so that it has audience, because the audience is the one that is going to react at some point, and it's going to, you know, I don't know, if somebody says kill all the members of this group, there has to be an audience that are going to listen to this message and try to act according to this message, etc. And also think of the context. Why the context? Because not every hate speech is going to constitute hate speech that is going to incite violence in every context. Because what is very, very contextual for Bosnia and Herzegovina, what is going to make people do certain crimes here, it's not going to make the same people do the same in the United States of America, because we have different historical, cultural, and ethnic and national context here that is going to make violence possible in my country, but not in the USA. We can go on. So I already said this, we can go on as well. So I just wanted us to go through this and have in mind that I said the context is very important. The speaker is very important, because it's not the same if I say something with my, I don't know, 1,000 followers on Instagram, and if a religious leader, politician, or somebody who has really strong authority says something, because the speaker has to have certain authority that can somehow, influence people to do certain behavior, to do certain things. Of course, the intent, I think we are all going to agree that it's really hard to, let's say, prove what was the intent of certain person to say certain things. Was it the intent of person to incite the violence, to offend certain group, to put under a certain group under the pressure, etc., etc. But it's very important that we actually see what is the behavior of this person, like, in a long-term shot, and see, like, is this person doing this constantly posting certain hate speech instances on their profile? Is this politician constantly using hate speech? Is this politician constantly targeting certain group of people, etc., etc., in order to understand what is the intent, and also asking ourselves, like, what is the intention of this post, if not hate? Like, why would you post something like this as well? The content, of course, is very important. The extent of the magnitude, in effect, like, how many people can be reached with this? Is it like a really small blog with very small number of people who are following it, or it's like a huge social media account with thousands or even millions of followers? And also, again, this is likelihood of harm, which is again connected to the context where something is happening, but also connected to the actual situation in the society, because Zahed is going to talk to you about this campaign, but also we have to think of the and he told me that he was working a lot on anti-Muslim and anti-Semitism in his work. So it's very important that we understand that at this moment, for example, anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Semitism are specifically dangerous, because we live in a specific moment in our world, unfortunately. So likelihood of harm today is much more than likelihood of harm, I don't know, a few years ago. Sorry, Karen, did you want to say something?
No, I didn't mean to keep changing the screen.
No, go ahead. It's okay. We can go ahead.
Right. Just before we do, I guess one of the things I was thinking, I was trying to get back to the chat box, and that's why I kept missing the screen, is that this likelihood of harm occurring, and that these things are really good guiding points when you're trying to figure out where to focus, because we can't do everything everywhere, right? So these are really helpful, I think, in terms of figuring out the most important places to start your focus. If you can only do it in one place, do it in the place that kind of meets these criteria. And that will help us be more effective, right, as we're trying to address hate speech. So
No,
that's all.
I would say focus on your community, focus on the place where you work, focus on the context where you work. It's important to know other contexts, but if you want to address hate speech in your own communities, you have to understand the nuances of your own communities. You have to understand, like, who are the minority groups in your community. You have to understand what are the relationships between majority and minority there. Also, to understand the historical context, are some group maybe historically, marginalized because they live in this community and because of the certain historical events that were happening, etc., etc. But you have to focus on the place where you live in, because you best understand this kind of community because you live there and you are part of it. But we can go on, Karen.
If I can, I mean, I just want to pick up on that, because this is another reason why the URI way of working, it's interfaith cooperation, right? So all URI members in cooperation circles are committed to and believe in the power of interfaith cooperation and exercise this on a daily basis. So this again puts our members in a unique position. They have the relationships quite potentially. So maybe they can't reach the people who are doing the hate speech, but they may know somebody who can, because especially if it's like targeted toward a religious minority and they know where it's coming from, they may have a relationship already with someone from that group who has influence with them, and talking to them and encouraging them to use their influence with their own constituents could be a very effective way of addressing something, and not even having to go out online and push back, but getting someone from that group to talk to their own people, right? So I want to just talk about it in the context of the URI interfaith modality. The way our way of going about doing everything that we do, I think, is really critical and important in this regard. So
Okay.
I'll go to the next.
So Karen, I would like us now to go a few slides ahead, because I want to give the space to Zahid to speak, because I know, and then afterwards he can come back to these examples. Just go ahead, yeah, stay on the social media. Yeah.
All right.
Just
So,
one slide.
Yeah. Do you want me to stop sharing so you can share?
Just one slide before, and then we will go to Zahid.
Got it.
Now, I just want to go to social media, and then we will go to the examples afterwards. But I want to use this particular moment for social media, because we spoke about the extent, how many audience can be, how many people can be reached. So thanks to social media, a lot of people can be reached. So I'm just giving you certain data here that only in 2020, first quarter 2020, 9.6 million pieces of content deemed hate speech were taken from Facebook. So just imagine first quarter of 2020 on Facebook, 9.6 million pieces, and probably much more, but they were not taken. Also in YouTube, 5 million comments, April to June in 2019. That's a lot. We can't address all of that, obviously, it's not possible. So just to have this in mind. So thanks to the social media and this anonymity, hate speech can spread like a fire through the forest. And I think we are also witnessing this at this particular moment in which we live in, that it's really spreading like a disease, as Karen says, contagious as a disease, and it's spreading. But also social media can be used also for diffusing hate speech. So it's important that we know that everything what can be used to spread hate speech, we can also use it to diffuse hate speech. So we need to understand that social media is also our own advantage. Yes, we work in our local communities, but we also, every one of us has probably here social media. No matter how small it is, it's important that we send messages from these platforms that we have, that we don't stand for hate speech. And instead of saying like, I'm against hate speech, you say what you stand for. So it's much more powerful maybe to say, I stand for solidarity, I stand for compassion, I stand with this group or with that group, instead of saying, I don't stand with this or I don't stand with that. It's much more important to be affirmative rather than just, saying I don't do this or I don't do that. But thanks to social media, we can do something as well. And now I want to hand over to Zahid to tell us how we can do certain things and how we can use amazing, tremendous toolkit produced by his organization. So Zahid, over to you, and then we will go back to some other things that I want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emina. That was a really, really wonderful overview of hate speech, and it does bring questions for communities when they're inundated with hate speech, especially if they're targeted by particular groups in certain ways. If I could share my screen, am I able to do that now?
You are now.
Wonderful. Let's see if this works. Share. Go ahead. Oops. All right. Sorry. I'll start from here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Zahid Amanullah. I'm with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. I'm a senior fellow there. I focus on communities and counter speech, specifically creating campaigns to push back against hate. I will tell a little bit about what counter speech is. It really is this is what, if a community creates campaigns. Now, before I mention that part, you heard about hate speech, potential, definitions of hate speech, views of hate speech. There's legislation that's been enacted to try to limit hate speech on social media platforms. You might have heard of the Digital Services Act and the UK Online Harms Safety Bill and others. When those fail, then you have the platforms themselves, and they have their terms of service and their content moderation efforts. When those fail, those two layers, if you will, communities are left with what falls through the cracks. And at that stage, communities themselves have, need to be able to protect themselves through campaigns to change the narrative. So hate speech really is about defining a community or defining an identity group with a narrative that denigrates them or puts them at harm's way or incites violence. And so communities need to have control of their narrative. They need to be able to write their narrative about who they are, what they stand for, the truth about about them as a community. So this is what we've called counter speech or counter narratives. We've done a lot of research over the last 10 years on how to develop these narratives. So counter narratives essentially to extremist narratives, focusing on positive stories, highlighting how extremist activities negatively impact on people, the hypocrisy of extremists, the people who are targeting you, setting the facts straight. You can even use satire and humor if you want. There's a whole bunch of strategies. The challenge that we have with communities is that they don't have the knowledge or the tools or the resources to fashion narratives to help protect them. So when we're talking about creating campaigns to counter hate speech, now, as has been said, hate speech can come from any number of places, in any number of ways, from any number of people. In many cases, you have to identify how the speech is reaching you, what the content is that's reaching you, who is promoting that content. Is it a group, an individual? Sometimes it's a state. And then what that narrative is, what's that message that is harming a community. So these are kind of key things to understand when you're trying to create a campaign to counter hate speech. So when you're creating a campaign to counter that, there are a number of strategies that you can enable. One is, of course, the social media companies can block that content. That's not always effective, but that's one strategy you can use. Of course, developing the speech, the campaign itself, is another element of the strategic, decision making. How do you do that? What's the response that will mitigate the hate speech? Who's going to develop that content? Is it audio, video, text? Is it matching the hate speech that's being sent to you? Sometimes it's appended to that speech. For example, if the hate speech is on social media platforms, is the counter to that going to attach to that speech if it hasn't been taken down already by the platforms? In terms of people who are being targeted privately in the counter narrative, is that an option, or can you reach mass audiences? And then, of course, monitoring and evaluation. How do you know that whatever you've created is effective? So these are all kind of complex, you know, factors that come into play. A lot of them are very familiar to people in communications industries or media industries, but not to communities on the ground. So there has to be a way to lower the barrier to entry so that communities can take part in creating narratives about themselves. I mentioned monitoring and evaluation. This is another thing. You can really get into the weeds with this, but really you need to understand how, when you have a campaign, you know, how do you measure it? What are the objectives? Are they measurable? Are they realistic? You know, you want to understand all of these so that you can calibrate your campaign strategy. It's not always a one-off. Sometimes it's an ongoing strategy. You want to make sure the next campaign is more effective than the previous campaign. These metrics that you use to measure and evaluate are when they're online, but also offline. The three major ones are awareness, how many people see your message. So if it's on social media or if it's even on a mainstream media platform or a podcast or radio, how many people are actually reaching it? Engagement is how people react to the content. Do they share it? Do they like it? Do they comment on it? Do they create, you know, other commentary that's inspired by it? And then the final thing that's really, really important is impact. Can we measure a change in behavior of the audiences who see the campaigns? This is kind of the, you know, the gold standard, is trying to have a campaign that changes behavior. And I know this sounds really sophisticated for, you know, when you're talking about, for example, a small community somewhere that just wants to set the story straight about who they are. You know, these can be quite complicated. So our challenge has been to try to make sure that this stuff is accessible and to walk people through the steps to create campaign content. So we created several years ago this online toolkit called the Campaign Toolkit. There's a link that's been shared. We created this in cooperation with all of the major social media companies, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Microsoft, because they understood that this was a necessary complement to what they were doing to try to limit hate speech on the platform. You heard from Emina how many messages were taken off by Facebook and YouTube, and that's, you know, that's still not enough. There's still messaging that gets through, and this is sort of the other piece of the puzzle. So this toolkit online walks you through a number of steps. How to plan a campaign is the first step. And what you do in the toolkit is you register an account, you log in, and you enter information into the system. And the information, it prompts you onto certain things like, when is your campaign going to run? What's the title? What's the budget? Who's the audience? What are the objectives? And how are you going to measure success with those objectives? And it walks you through each of these steps in really detailed fashion so that you can understand what it is that you're entering. And then finally, it guides you into choosing the appropriate message and the appropriate messenger. Once you've planned the campaign, it walks you through the stages of how to create campaign content. This is, again, one of the things that we found in our research when we work with communities, that they struggle to do this. Of course, technology has made it easier with phones and social media, and, you know, especially short form video. That's one thing that's changed a lot in the last 5 years with TikTok and Reels. So people are getting more and more comfortable and familiar with creating video content, but still, you want to understand what's the kind of content that's going to reach the audience that you want to reach. Usually it's the same way that hate speech is reaching you. It's kind of the same channels you want to reach back, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes you want to go beyond that to a wider community and share a narrative that gets to people who are, you know, beyond the platform that the hate speech is being disseminated on. So this walks you through that. It takes you, again, through steps where you enter in the information, and what it does is it keeps all of this information in the back and creates essentially a guidebook, a personalized, customized guidebook in a PDF form that you can share with members of your team to how to create a campaign, and then finally how to promote the campaign. You know, a lot of the narrative messaging that you can get out on social media, of course, can benefit from promotion. Now, most of this promotion will cost some money. In some cases, you can get free campaign credits if you just apply for it, if it's a good cause and it's affiliated to the Campaign Toolkit. A lot of the social media companies will give you free credits. So you can actually then make sure that this stuff reaches the targeted audiences. If you're familiar with how the targeted marketing works on Facebook, for example, or Instagram, you can define your target audience and make sure that they reach them. So these are just some snapshots of some of the resources that are in the toolkit. It shows you examples of successful counter-narrative campaigns that are used in the past, and you can see the keywords that have to do with who those campaigns are geared for and how they worked and how effective they were. You can just filter them out and browse them. Information about advertising and how that works is available. And then finally, I only have a few minutes left. I wanted to show you an example where I myself put this campaign toolkit into action for a case study where I live. I live in a small town in England with a Muslim community here that was bought a building to have as its first mosque. And so the money was raised and the building was purchased. Now, in my research, I know that the construction of mosques is a key focal point for the far right. And I knew that at some point when this became public knowledge that the far right would come after this community. So that's certainly what happened. So I had to put a strategy together beyond the campaigning. It also included working with police and allies, working with other faith communities to make sure that they understood what was happening and that they were ready to support us if we were targeted by hate speech. So sure enough, that happened. You can see that there's a person here who he even goes by the name of a mosque buster, and he created YouTube videos and social media content to try to get people in our community to oppose this mosque, including leaflets that were posted up in houses across the city. And this became news. There was news stories about it. We used that news to tell our story. So in part of our campaign toolkit, it includes mainstream media. And so we did a campaign based on mainstream media and got on the news, and we're able to share our views that way. You can see some of the messaging that was used by the far right against this. Now, one of the things that we did with this in particular instance, which was a protest, is they created accounts on social media, and we got the social media companies to remove the accounts. So this is where you want to, again, limit the amount of hate speech that comes, and then for the rest that comes through, deal with it with campaigns. So this was successful doing this. So the campaign messaging was all done on social media. It was photos, video, and text posts, all of which are available on the campaign toolkit. So we designed these campaigns to tell our story, to tell the truth about what people were going to say about us, and make sure that those reached the people within our community who would support or oppose this project. And at the end of the day, you can see these are some of the results that we got. You can see some of the comments from members of the community who said that, this was a masterclass in community engagement and making sure that the responses are calm and measured, dignified, rational, and so forth. So the campaign toolkit helped us put this all together. And so there's lessons that we learned from this in general. This was a specific example. Again, Emina's point about the local nature of this. We felt this was successful because it was local. It was focused on our community with a small Muslim community within a small city and getting allies involved. So, act locally is the first lesson we learned. Choosing the platforms carefully. Don't forget the offline engagement. Once you get to a community level, you can engage with allies offline. The Jewish community and the Christian community were very supportive of us. Pre-bunking is a strategy, which is when you anticipate the arguments and use those in your campaigns, so that if you know that they're going to say certain things about you, you get out in front of them and say that first. That was a big part of our campaign strategy. Monitor the content and the discourse online and offline, and so forth. And then don't forget the legislation and the moderating of content. Those are responsibilities of the government and the social media companies. So in a nutshell, I've gone through all that. We've got more resources online in our website, including that case study in detail. And if you have any questions, you can let me know. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Zahed. So I think because you might need to leave soon, so can we talk
I can stay.
ask people? You can stay, okay? So we do want to have questions. So I'll turn it back to you. Emina, and carry it forward. Tell me if you want me to share the screen again.
Yes, please do. If we can go to the presentation again. And I'm also going to show some of the examples of what we were doing as well in Youth for Peace. First, I would like to thank to Zahid for this amazing presentation, because it's a very comprehensive toolkit, and I've been using some of those in my own work and campaigns, I have to say. It looks, sometimes it looks like, oh, it's a lot of work to do, but indeed, there is a work to do if we want to put something, properly, and if we want to present, as Zahid said, our narrative and our community, in the light that we want people to see us, not that other people describe us this or that way. But people who are spreading hate speech are also constantly working on spreading hate speech. So I also want to say that I think it's important that we don't think like campaign as something that's happening from, it starts here and finishes here. I have to say that we have to constantly campaign. We have to constantly work. We have to constantly, share our own narrative, because those who are spreading hate speech are also constantly working. So it's very important that we just, work. And I'm sure that your social medias ahead that you are using for your mosque is constantly putting something there, presenting your activities, presenting what you do, presenting presenting your own community, so that you just keep your communication with the people in the community. So I think it's very important that if we are doing also campaigns, that we think what we can also do beyond when the campaign is done, just to keep this constant contact with the people and with the audience. Because I would say that the sore spot sometimes of campaigning can be you do it, and many of these campaigns that were tremendous ended and they are not there anymore. So it's just a question how we can actually make this permanent work, because it's very important that we permanently work on let's say stopping hate speech and spread of hate speech, and I think reporting it to social media and to the authorities, it's just one small step, which is going to work when hate speech is already there. But we need to work before hate speech comes, and that's where these campaigns can also be very, very important. So we can go on, Karen.
All right.
We can skip these slides and we can just send them to people, the presentation, so they can understand some of these. But maybe just before we also get into the planning of the campaign, it's important to understand why people engage in hate and why they actually spread hate speech. There are a lot of research done, like why people spread hate speech, or engage in hate. But from one research that I got to read is that some of the people are just thrill seeking, because for them it's really funny to spread hate speech. It's really funny to go on internet and, I don't know, say some really nasty things about certain people. And it's very important that we then work, for example, especially with young people, to understand what are the consequences of this thrill seeking behavior that they want to show on social media. There are also some people who are thinking that, they have to defend their cause, their community, their nation, religion, ethnic group. So they are somehow, thinking that we belong to this ethnic group and we have to defend ourselves from the ethnic group that is living with us. So I'm just going to engage myself there and spread as much as hate speech, as much as hate I can, just to defend my own community. So it's important to understand, if we are working with, if this is the case with the people. Then there is also retaliation, hate for hate, because there are people who are engaging in hate speech because they think that their group is attacked, that somebody already spreads hate speech about them, and then they just spread more hate speech in return. So this is just a vicious circle that can go on and on and on. And the fourth one, which are the mission offenders, these are, I would say, the deadliest ones. These are the ones that I was mentioning at the beginning with, for example, a Christchurch attack in New Zealand, or in Pittsburgh and synagogue. These people were writing manifestos. These people were writing like 80, 90 pages of hatred against certain groups. And then they put this as their mission, that they have to destroy certain group of the people, and then they go and ravage and commit all sorts of hate crimes and attacks. And unfortunately, we see what we see in certain communities. So it's very important that we just understand there are different motivations behind hate speech. And when we are preparing, for example, a campaign, we have to know who we are targeting. Do we want to target, for example, thrill-seeking young people? And we have to know how to approach them and tell them, certain things to understand the consequences of their behavior. In my work on hate speech, I don't know, will Zahid agree or not? Mostly it works when you work with the movable middle. It's really hard to target those who are on the extreme sides. So it's very important that we target the movable middle who's indecisive. Should I spread hate speech or not spread hate speech? So, working with this huge chunk of people who are indecisive and getting them on the side of being, anti-hate speech rather pro-hate speech. This is at least the campaigns that I was trying to work on, to target these kinds of people who are, somehow in the middle, don't know what to do. So just to drag them on the side of not spreading hate speech at least. But what do you think are other reasons people engage hate speech? So please feel free to either unmute yourself and tell me, or you can just put it in the chat. So let's just have a little bit of conversation here. What do you think? What makes people to spread hate speech besides these things that I just said?
Well,
Okay,
if I could,
go ahead,
I mean,
go ahead.
yeah, just to add to your point, you were really spot on when you said, the movable middle is the important bit, because, a lot of people in that movable middle are, a lot of them are undecided about, they're being mobilized by the extremists and to agree with them, and some of them dip their toe in that pool, so to speak. But a lot of them, they're either, like you said, thrill seeking, or they don't really know what they're doing, or there's a possibility to change their behavior. So when we did our campaigns, for example, we had a lot of people said, you know what, I was suspicious of you, but when you started to communicate with us, you answered all my questions, and now I support you. So to us, that was an example of somebody who, in the absence of campaigns or creating that narrative, they have no one else to listen to but the extremists. And they're likely to sort of agree with them because they share the same ethnic background or national whatever. So that's a really, really important point. If we had tried to go after the extremists, I think we would have failed, because those people are hardened, and they always, they do this for a living practically, and it would have been a lot of effort for very little gain. So, but yeah, in our view, a lot of people were just on the fence, and they were just agreeing with the hate speech because they had no other information to go by.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Zahid, from the first hand of what you were doing. That's wonderful. Other people, what do you think? What are other reasons? Why would someone engage in hate speech? What do you think?
Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm sorry I arrived late, and I apologize for that. In fact, to answer this question, I think that the main reason for me, because I'm engaging myself in a counter speech in France, mainly in France. I think that one of the main reasons is ignorance and the lack of true programs, educational programs against hate speech in the formal education in France. I think this example is a specific example within Europe, for instance, but it illustrates that when we cannot teach what we call in France l'enseignement du fait religieux, religious fact teaching. For instance, I give you an example, a true example. We have only 2 to 10 hours of religious phenomenon teaching in the formal education in France, in the secondary school and early school, and this makes youth not having enough knowledge for developing tools against hate speech. And I participated 2 or 3 months ago in the southern France in a round table within the hats and the voices of the main monotheist religions, Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, and Islam. And I told them that the problem is in the official program of formal education, and this is one of the great problems of secularism in France, which is at the same time something which is positive and at the same time negative. So that's why I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for bringing the French experience here as well, and talking about your own context. I see that Sheriff also wants to speak. Sheriff, please go ahead.
Yes. Well, I have one concern, which is what we use in the English word is confirmation bias. Like people only receive information that they like or they agree with. So here comes the role of social media, which is, I really agree with that, because I got a blog, which is called Tolerance. And actually, the good thing about social media that whenever you post something, you never lose it, because it always comes again, and they can reshare until you build a literature that supports tolerance and accepting other people, and keep the discussion going on about things like the definitions, because actually when you define something, you kill it, because definition basically kills what you think about, because if you don't have new ideas, the definition stays on, and then people becomes dogmatic about this definition. So the discussion is always something that pushes away these definitions into different areas so that we can reach some sort of tolerance that's developed over years. Because I mean, like, people come up with ideas that this is the definition. So other people say, no, this is not the definition. And then the argument gets very tense. So this is my sharing part here. And thank you for the presentation, very edifying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you also for sharing your own experience and sharing with us what could be other causes of hate speech. And I'm seeing that we have a comment as well, which says that there are a lot of reasons and causes of hate speech, but also inability to properly manage emotions or anger with the persons to whom the hatred is directed, but also there is mentality, there is culture, etc., that I'm seeing in this comment. But maybe just to wrap this part up, yes, there is a lot of ignorance about other groups. There is a lot of prejudices and stereotypes that are already existing in the society that are just somehow reinforcing hate speech, and then hate speech reinforces those prejudices and stereotypes, and it's sort of a vicious circle that's really hard to break. And when we are speaking about this, it's very important then to understand that when we work on hate speech, we also need to work on the root causes of it. So it's important that we treat hate speech as a symptom of much larger issues that we have in the society. So it's not just about treating hate speech as hate speech, but also treating those narratives behind the hate speech, which are somehow, if you imagine hate speech as like an iceberg, so the tip of the iceberg is hate speech, but under the iceberg, under the water, there are so many other things that we have to tackle through the education, exactly, in order to prevent hate speech from emerging at all. And also when we speak about hate, when I speak with my participants, I always tell them that you cannot prohibit someone to hate, because hatred is a feeling. You can prohibit hate speech. You can prohibit expression of these kinds of things. But in order to work on hatred, we have to work on the feelings. So we have to work with people to transform this feeling of hatred, to for them to understand who are the other people, and not prohibiting them to hate something, because it's really not possible to legally even prohibit hatred of someone, because hatred is a feeling. So we have to work on transforming this feeling of hatred, so that we can do through the programs of education, and then, you know, bringing people together, having these kind of community meetings, and showing to people like who is actually on the other side, who is the other community, who are those other people that we don't like, that have some kind of horns or that are going to destroy us, etc., because we have those narratives about them. So Karen, can we go on to slide number 19, because I want to go, because we don't have so much time to go through these examples, but maybe slide number 19. What else can we do besides these campaigns and besides education and besides what we said? Do you have any examples, what you could say, like what could be done in order to suppress hate speech, in order to not suppress it, to address it, literally, to mitigate it? Do you have any ideas? Can you share your thoughts either in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and share with us? What else can we do? Sheriff, please go ahead.
I believe in art. I think art is a key word in like getting people to think and rethink and define and redefine things around them. So that's why I work with some artists in Egypt, and we do things about that. Like we do some writing, some poetry and poems, and we kind of try to share them and reshare them all the time. So we kind of try to make some sort of butterfly effect, or whatever we come up with. Because I know the situation is very complicated and the humans are very complicated. And the formative years we cannot control. And all the teaching they have been receiving, we can just come up with a counter narrative so that they may change a bit. So that's what we do right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. It would be lovely to see some of your art and some of the things that you are doing. I'm sure it's very inspirational. Anyone else?
Thank you.
What do you think we could do?
We
Please.
yeah. For me, I think we should sensitize parents and engage parents in this work, engage them in this effort continuously at all levels. Small experience was experienced in Switzerland later, because I work in both countries, in France and Switzerland, is that we implement ateliers, donc workshops, within 1 week, I think, one or 2 hours a week, with children, with the presence of parents, and talk about the dangers of hate speech. I think that this is one example where we can apply widely. Thank you.
Wonderful. This is what we do in Bosnia as well. At least with my organization, we do a lot of workshops for young people to understand what hate speech is. We mostly would work with young people. We don't work with parents, but it's a very important category as well, parents. So it's very important to understand how we can work with them, because a lot of things are coming from this, you know, home education and then education in schools, etc., etc. So I think in URI we have more than 1,000 circles. So I'm sure there is a lot of circles working with parents, and we can definitely think of what we can do also in this kind of arena. But can we go one slide more, Karen? So here are just some of the ways that there is a very huge INAC network like mostly working in Europe, but they also have members outside Europe. So they actually give some advices what can be done. Like, of course, I told you already, reporting to the authorities, where you can report, obviously, where there are certain legal there is legislation where you can actually report hate speech. For example, in my country, there is no lex specialis or separate law that is treating hate speech, unfortunately. You can also report it to social media. And nowadays, social media has a huge, huge, huge community standards, like on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter. And it's really important to be, familiarized with it so you can understand what falls under a category of hate speech according to these social media, so you report it. Fact-checking, debunking, it can work, not always, because it depends. Are people going actually to listen to information because they will say you are spreading lies? I don't agree with that. Like, what is your information? What is your source? This is my source. So maybe it can work, maybe it cannot, because none of these strategies is working 100%. Let's just be honest. Like, be prepared that people are going to argue with you, even if you bring them like 100% sources that are like 100% correct. They will tell you that's not the truth because they don't want to believe it. That's this confirmation bias that Sheriff was actually mentioning. If you know a person, it's always good to give a friendly warning to a person. Hey, I don't know, my dear friend, you're spreading hate speech there. Maybe you should reconsider what are you talking about? What are you sending out there on social media, etc., etc. So if you have a personal relationship with a person, it's always to do this, good to this. Showing and evoking empathy, even showing empathy to the people who are perpetrators, not labeling the people and telling them, I don't know, you're an idiot, you're, I don't know, a jerk, you are biased this or biased that. That's not going to work. You have to show somehow empathy to understand why a person is doing certain things. So definitely not labeling the people who are spreading hate speech and telling them, I don't know, you are this or that, and because you are just going to make things worse. And there was actually even a research done on more than 1,000 tweets. They were trying to use humor, they were trying to deleting the tweets, and they were trying to use empathy-based approach. And this research showed that empathy-based approach was the best approach to actually, try to address hate speech. So it's not easy. It's not easy to put yourself in the shoes of those who are hating and somehow going outside of your comfort zone, but it has better results than labeling someone. Using humor and satire, there are some very nice campaigns using humor and satire, like trying to create memes and things like that, but also be careful there, not overstepping it and not, creating humor that is going to actually be offensive and that is going maybe to be counterproductive and just create even more hate speech. And then finally, counter and alternative narratives. This is something what Zahid was talking about, creating this alternative narrative, alternative to hate speech. And this is where these beautiful campaign toolkits can help us. And we can go one more slide, Karen. This is also what we did. We had our own toolkit, No Hate, No Violence. We had a campaign with young people. We engaged with young people from different ethnic and religious backgrounds in Bosnia, asking them to be parts of our campaign, faces of our campaign, and they were sending their own messages about hate speech and importance of interrupting hate speech, not using hate speech, and talking to other young people. So we decided to have young people, youth faces, talking to our own huge group of young people that we had as followers on our social media, and we were actually having young people of different ethnic and religious backgrounds to show the unity that we are all together in countering, in addressing hate speech. It's not just one group of people, I don't know, only Muslims, only Jews, only Christians, but we all together, so that we show that this is a problem that affects all of us. And we also have a toolkit with some very interesting texts on different, approaches to hate speech, and also some workshops there. So you can also have a look at it. It's online and it's in English language. And one slide more, Karen. This is another thing that we tried to do, a very short campaign, very short thing that we did during the World Interfaith Harmony Week. We decided to come as an interfaith group here. So we decided to dig into 11 different religious traditions and find quotes from different scriptures that are supporting positive and non-offensive speech. So we decided to come up with this poster as a I don't know, learning source or something that is going to change the narrative that religion is only like a fueling of conflict, that religion is only good for divisions. We wanted to put it together to show that religion can bring people together, that this kind of multi-faith, interfaith approach is somehow bringing people together, and that we somehow also influence people of different religions to understand their own scriptures, and to understand that good speech is very important in religions, and that religions can contribute to peace much more than the conflict, which is unfortunately spread narrative that religion is something that mostly people use for conflict. So we did this for the World Interfaith Harmony Week. It's also available online, and a lot of people actually wanted to use it as an educational material for their classes. So they approached us and asked us, like, can we have this, like, is it free of charge? So for us, it's important that whatever we produce is there. So if you, in case you want to use it, it's also very much available. So just to show that, we stand for this. We didn't say we are against hate here. We just said we stand for this. We stand for these values, for compassion, for understanding each other, for interfaith dialogue, for coming together, etc., etc. And one more slide, I think. And here are just 2 examples that you can find on the internet as well. A beautiful artist from Italy who is covering hateful graffiti and hate speech with a food. And he's doing it in Italy with Italian food, very contextual, very local. Another thing that you can do is actually organize conversations with the people who were, let's say, extremists before, who were part of the hateful group, so they can share their experience with the people, and they can share, like, how it is to be on the side who is hating and on the side who's not hating anymore. This is a wonderful thing from Amnesty International in Poland, where they are showing encounters of refugees and hosting community, and just showing, what 4 minutes of just looking at each other's eyes can bring to people to understand each other on a human base level. And a wonderful video from the Denmark TV, where it is showing what is actually connecting us rather than dividing us. So these are all examples of counter and alternative narratives, and counter and alternative strategies that you can use in your own work when you are actually trying to address hate speech, which is not just, working when hate speech is already there, but it's actually really, showing that we can prevent hate speech if we just show, the other side of the society, which is not hateful, which is coming together and what brings us together. And I think I will wrap up here and give to Karen, because she has one more slide where she wants to give us a little bit of, and these are just additional resources that you can access, but you can access them via the presentation that we can share with you afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I already mentioned this empathy-based approach.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, hi, everybody. Am I on mute? Let's stop sharing. Okay, good. I couldn't tell if I was on mute while I was sharing. So, this has been fantastic. I really want to thank Emina and Zahed for your contributions, and really to everybody for your input, because I think that you're sharing your experience on the ground has really enriched the conversation today. And we heard lots of examples. Nobody called it like interrupting, like, they didn't use the terms that we use when we talk about the health approach to violence prevention, or which applied to hate speech. But they gave examples that really actually were detecting, right, paying attention to when it's happening, and then interrupting it, right? So detect it and interrupt it before it happens, or try to prevent the spread, right? That's an important component of the health approach applied in reality in these examples that were given, right? So changing the behavior is done by providing other examples. And the example that Zahed gave of the way the campaign that they used changed people's behaviors as they were exposed to this new content and this other way of thinking, right? So you're detecting and interrupting, you're changing the behavior, and you're changing the overall norms within these different communities, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, within the groups that, the circles of influence that you all have or we all have as individuals and as organizations. And so this is why we thought it was so important, as from the perspective of our department that focuses on partnership and violence prevention, and from the perspective of our desire to really try to get people to think about violence differently. So it's not about bad people, it's about a bad behavior, right? So if you treat it as a bad behavior, it changes all of the tools that we can use and the way we approach it. It doesn't make things automatically go into a rule of law framework where you counter violence or counter hate only with locking people up or some sort of like violence, you know, against violence, right? So it really, we want to encourage people to be thinking about these things a little bit differently, think about it as bad behavior and something that can be prevented, right? We don't have to accept that it happens and that we just wring our hands about it and we can't do anything about it. We really should feel empowered to do something about this within our own communities and reaching out through our interfaith modalities to people who maybe we don't have the right like credibility with, but we know people who have credibility with the people who could actually change what's going on in that's spreading hate within a community, right? So from that was really the goal of our conversation that we wanted to have here today, was really kind of to share and inspire people to think broadly about what is possible, feel empowered to use our influence to interrupt and stop the spread of hate speech, and to stand up for new norms that don't accept this in our communities. It's happening all too much in the United States, but elsewhere as well. And so that's really all I want to do. Emina, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing for Youth for Peace and for your help with the facilitation and just really guiding this conversation today and sharing your knowledge and your experience. Really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And Zahed, it's always wonderful to spend time with you. Thank you for sharing your experience and the toolkit. And I hope that everybody feels, I hope, inspired and encouraged coming out of this, and that we all are able to go forward with our lives knowing that we can do something about hate speech. Not only that we can, but we need to, right? That's our role to play in the world. So with that, I'd love for everybody to just, if you want to come off camera, if you feel like it, and wave goodbye at everybody. It's been a wonderful 90 minutes. Emina, Zahed, thank you once again. Thank you all for participating. Wonderful to see you all. And we will be sharing the recording of this to everyone who signed up. And we'll also share the links